Hello, and welcome to the Menlo Park Housing Element Zoning Updates video created by me, Mayor Jen Wallison of Menlo Park, District 3. Please note that the viewpoints that we're going to be covering in this video are mine alone and do not represent those of the Menlo Park City Council. I'm recording this video on Saturday, August 19th, 2023. And by the time you watch this, the information could be updated. Also, if you see any errors in this video, please do let me know. One of my main objectives as a council member and a mayor is to make government more accessible. So I've put together this video with the hopes of helping you understand how to look at the zoning updates that the City Council is contemplating as part of its housing element. Today, we're going to be going through quite a bit of material. There's going to be an executive summary, a housing element review that's going to be very short. We're going to talk about zoning 101. We're going to look at the housing element commitments that were made, about minimum density and about affordability. We're going to be looking at 3 major zoning district changes affecting El Camino Real downtown, the commercial districts and apartment districts. We're going to be looking at some other zoning changes, and then I'm going to conclude with some final thoughts on policy, next steps, and ways to engage. So the executive summary is that there's an important study session on Tuesday, August 22nd, which will be going over zoning that the City Council and the city must make to be consistent with various commitments that have been made in the housing element. And that has been a over 2-year process that we've been undergoing. The City Council specifically will be making zoning amendments to a couple zoning districts, that being the downtown and El Camino area, the commercial districts, and apartment districts. And the purpose of this is to encourage more housing, especially more affordable housing, which was one of our goals of the housing element. It's important to note that these zoning amendments will likely produce taller and denser buildings, especially around downtown and near transit, and that we must make these zoning amendments by January 31st, 2024 to be compliant with our housing element. So for those of you who have not been following along with the housing element, it's been a very long process. So if you want to get up to date on what's been happening over the past 2+ years, really since March 2021, you can go to the housing element website at menlopark.gov/housing element, click under project timeline, and you can find tons of presentations, materials, videos outlining what's been going on over the last 2 years. We're not going to be covering all that because I'm assuming that those watching this video are pretty up to date. I've also taken the time over the last 2 years to create some other videos. So you might want to check those out, and there's links to those available wherever you found this video. So just a quick recap, what is the housing element? It's a state mandate from the California Department of Housing and Community Development called HCD. It happens every 8 years. We're in cycle 6, which plans for housing between 2023 and 2031. And our number of housing units that we're required to site for and plan for has jumped dramatically from the last cycle to this cycle. So in the last cycle, we were required to site for 655 units, and this cycle, close to 3,000. Not only that, we're also told to have a buffer of 30%, so almost 4,000 units of housing Menlo Park has been required to site for. This is something happening all over the state of California and all over the Bay, and this chart on the right is showing how this is impacting all of the cities in the Bay Area. So one of the big themes, if you've been following along with our housing element, is really the need for affordable units. So the number of units that the city is required to site for is broken down by income categories. And there's a huge emphasis on affordable units, especially in districts 2 through 5, because we've already cited for, through our projects that are under development, quite a bit of affordable units in District 1. So we have a need to site for almost 1,500 affordable units in districts 2 through 5. And the main way affordable units are generated are through 100% affordable projects and our city's own inclusionary housing policy, where we require all large developments to generate 15% of their units at the low income affordable level. Now, it's much more efficient to produce 100% affordable projects because then all of those units can count as affordable towards our almost 1,500 target of affordable units. but it can be very challenging to have 100% affordable. The cost of land is extremely high, and it can require public land or a land dedication. It also requires really creative financing with tax credits. So we really need to look at kind of both of those strategies. And in our environmental impact report, to achieve these affordable units, we're assuming a mix of these strategies. And so we've studied up to 4,000 units to achieve that almost 1,500 affordable units. Just to, again, do a quick recap, affordable might not be what you have in mind. New data was just released in June of this year, showing that the area median income for San Mateo County for a household of 4 is $175,000. That means that somebody a single person making $104,000 a year is considered low income. And it's important to note also that when we talk about affordable housing, even moderate income at 120% of area median income is considered affordable housing. So how does the 104 low income compare to what we pay our city employees? You can see here on this chart below, I've pulled out some of the job classifications from our recent salary list, and pretty much a lot of these jobs would be qualifying as low income. So really, we're talking about housing for people that are essential workers and that make our cities function, not just public employees, but people that work in our restaurants, that take care of our kids, and whatnot. So the key housing element milestones was that we adopted our housing element in January of this year. The Housing Community Development Department of the state returned our housing element with needed revisions, and we resubmitted our housing element to the state. We're currently awaiting news to see if that is acceptable to them. And within our housing element, we've made many program and policy commitments. And the one we're going to be focusing on today is this January 31st, 2024 requirement, which is in about less than 6 months, where we must implement zoning changes to increase our permitted densities to allow more housing on sites. So before we dive into it, let's talk about zoning. And please note that I'm not a zoning expert. I'm doing my best to think about what I would want to know about zoning. So Wikipedia has a definition. It's an urban planning tool which calls for different zones within a city. And the different zones might have different regulations. Some zones might be for residential, others might be for commercial or industrial. And the regulations govern the size, the density, the shape of those buildings. It also might say what uses are permitted with each zoning district and whether those whether those uses are just permitted outright or conditionally. So we're going to be talking a lot about zoning right now. In Menlo Park, we have dozens of zoning districts. You may live in a residential zoning district like an R1, or you may live in an apartment zoning district like R3. We have a lot of different commercial zoning districts. We have zoning districts for different areas of the city. This is a map on the left of the Menlo Park zoning map. So each of the different colors represents a different one of those zoning districts. And if you go to find this map, you can just Google Menlo Park zoning map. It should pop up. And there's a legend that shows what each of those zoning districts we saw on the previous page corresponds to with the color. I've zoomed in here on the right to show kind of Menlo Park District 3 zoning districts. You can see this yellow area here is Vintage Oaks, where I live. It's a suburban zoning district. You can see some of these orange districts are apartment districts. This light blue is the downtown El Camino specific plan district, which we're going to be talking a lot about, and so on. So there's a lot of different zoning standards that fall within kind of the category of zoning. There's something called land use, which is the type of development that's permitted, either outright or conditionally. There's something called floor area ratio, or FAR, which talks about the amount of building that's permitted on each parcel. And that's usually expressed in square footage to the amount of lot space. There's density, which is dwelling units per acre. DUAC is something we're going to see. So how many units can be on any acre of land? There's height, and we actually break it down between the total building height and the facade height. So you might feel when you're walking on the street that the building's lower, but then it might step back and be higher. Setbacks, how far away from the street, the massing, if the building kind of goes in or if it's just one straight shot, and a lot more. So zoning encompasses quite a bit of development standards. I'm going to show you a few examples. So this is floor area ratio, or FAR, and this is demonstrating, so if you think of a 1.0 FAR, if it's a one-story building, that would mean that all of the floor area of the acreage of the lot is covered by the building. The same floor area ratio could be a two-story building and only cover half of that, and so on. So depending on the floor area ratio, there could be a lot of different ways a building is set up. Also, the intensity can feel very different depending on the mix of all of those development standards. So here I've pulled two different recent developments, one in Redwood City on the left and one in Mountain View on the right. These are both 100% affordable. I'm kind of asking the question, which one feels more intense? I'll let you think about that. So if you look here, if you were to just look at density, the one on the left in Redwood City is 86 units per acre. The one on the right is actually 136 units an acre. The one on the left is 7 stories tall, and the one on the right is 5 stories tall. And then they have a different amount of units and different parking requirements. So really it's the mix of all of these zoning standards that lead us to have a certain feel for any given building. So now we're going to go back to what we kind of promised in our housing element to the state. So remember, this has already been submitted to the state. The state has already kind of kicked it back and said we need to make some revisions, and we're waiting to hear more. So for those of you who are following along the housing element, we really had an emphasis on opportunity sites. So we identified 69 sites throughout the city, marked in this yellow color, of where we intended to site affordable housing in Menlo Park. There's two things that we're required to do with zoning to meet that commitment. The first is some of those sites that we just saw on the last page currently do not allow residential uses. So we have to make sure that all of the sites that are identified as housing opportunity sites are now zoned for residential uses. Also, we have to make sure that the base density per acre for each of those sites is at least 30. Because we have that emphasis of affordable units, we must make sure per state requirement that those buildings enable at least 30 units per acre for each of those sites. Another major commitment that we've made with our housing element sites is that even though that the base density on those sites is 30 units an acre, if the development is 100% affordable, we've made a commitment that will allow up to 100 units an acre for development on those sites. And we've done that, and we're going to go over this by two what I'm calling supersizing tools. One is a local, actually first is the state density bonus law, which is a state law which any development can use. And the other is our own Menlo Park affordable housing overlay. And these are two tools that we basically already committed to in the housing element that can be used to supersize these projects. There's a third tool for projects that are within 1/2 mile of transit, and that is through a state bill called AB Assembly Bill 1763, and we're going to talk about that as well. Like we've covered before, it's very hard to get affordable housing, and you can see the delta here between kind of our base zoning, which might be possible for maybe market rate, and what we're allowing for affordable. And one of the reasons that we kind of amped up the affordable is to give affordable housing developers that advantage. So a market rate development doesn't, which can afford maybe higher costs because they don't have to distribute all of their costs via some affordable and some market rate. The market rate is using all market rates, so they're kind of making more money. So we're giving the affordable kind of an advantage here. Okay, so let's talk about that first supersizing tool, which is called the state density bonus law. And so basically the state says, if your development has more affordable units and are more deeply affordable, they're going to give a bonus. So let's look at the very bottom here. So if a project has 100% of their units as affordable, then they're going to give an 80% bump. and those are all very low and low income. If the project has maybe a 15% for very low income, they'll give a 50% bump. And just to make sure we understand, our city already has, for low income housing, we already require 15% of all these large developments over 20 units to allow 15%. So these really have to be above and beyond what we already give as a city. Let's see how this plays out for imagine a 1 acre parcel that's zoned at the base at 30 units an acre. So let's look at the bottom first. So if 100% of those units are affordable, that means there could be 30 units on that 1 acre parcel. Using the state bonus density for 100% affordable, which I said was an 80% bonus. So that means 24 additional units can be generated. You add the 24 and the 30 and you get 54 units. So using the state density bonus, base zoning of 30 units an acre can actually generate 54 units. It's more of a sliding scale for less affordability. So for what I showed you before for that low income, if it's 24%, it's not 100%, you get a smaller bonus of 50%, and that would yield 45 units. So we actually have as I mentioned, there's 2 supersizing tools. So this was the state density bonus law. In our housing element, we committed to have a second supersizing thing that would again get us to 100, because we saw on this 30 units an acre, it didn't quite get us to the 100 that we promised. So we have an additional affordable housing overlay that then gives an additional 86% bonus on top prior to the state giving their bonus to allow us to get to 100. And this actually means that our base densities that are provided throughout the city that are in the housing element at 30 units an acre, we're actually saying we could get already 55 units an acre prior to the state kicking in. So let's just look at that. These are the site sheets from the housing element. Each of our 69 opportunity sites has its own site sheet. And even though these are being zoned at 30 units an acre, you can see that we're showing the state with a 1 acre example that you can actually get 55 units an acre. So how do the affordable housing overlay that the city is providing work with the state density bonus law to get to that 100 units an acre? Well, let's take a look. Let's again go back to that 1 acre parcel that has a 30 unit an acre density. That would give 30 units. With our affordable housing bonus, which I just mentioned was 86%, that would give us another 26 units. That would give us to 56 units, or on that previous slide it said 55. Then we take this, which is our local units that we're producing, and we multiply it by the state density bonus law, which was 80%. This is for an 100% affordable development. We'd get another 45 units. So you would add the 45 to the local 56, and you would get 101 units, or for this 1 acre property, 101 units an acre. I know this is very confusing, and I'm going through it very fast. But I just want to make sure I cover everything. This will be applied to all 69 housing opportunity sites in the housing element, minus site 38, which is the flood school site. Please note that in addition to these bonuses, there are some incentives and waivers that are also offered to developers when they're doing 100% affordable with these kind of supersizing things. So that's just something else to be aware of. One interesting thing to note is the Planning Commission met on Monday, August 14th, and looked at this, those numbers at the kind of getting to 100 units an acre for 100% affordable. And they're actually recommending that we enable 150 units an acre for 100% affordable. And that's based on a lot of feedback that affordable housing developers have been giving on what it takes to create these affordable housing units, and also looking at what types of affordable housing are being generated in neighboring jurisdictions. So if that were the case, looking at the same example of 30 units an acre, we would be using a multiplier of 175% locally, so that 30 units could actually bring us to 83 units prior to using the state density bonus, which then the 83 units would be multiplied by 80 and then added together to give us 150 units. So that's something that the council will be discussing at the study session on August 22nd. Now, I said there are two supersizing tools. There's an additional supersizing tool that comes out of AB 1763, which has to do with developments that are 100% affordable within half-mile transit. And this map here is showing the area in Menlo Park. So this is El Camino Real right here and the Caltrain station. Everything that you see kind of highlighted here is within a half-mile from transit. The gray is within Menlo Park's jurisdiction. So if a affordable housing 100% is within half-mile from transit, they can have unlimited dwelling units per acre. They can actually increase the amount of height that they allow up to 3 stories or 33 feet. So the important thing I want you to learn about these kind of supersizing tools is that when you're looking at base densities in the zoning ordinance, remember that if the projects are 100% affordable, with these various supersizing tools, the Affordable Housing Overlay, the State Density Bonus Law, and AB 1763, the actual zoning intensity, including the height, could be greater. All right, we're now going to go through specific zoning districts that are going to be rezoned as part of this process. So as you remember, these are the housing element sites in yellow, and this was the zoning map that we looked at earlier of Menlo Park. There's really 3 zoning districts that are going to be greatly impacted. And out of those 69 opportunity sites that we have in our housing element, about 31 are coming from the downtown El Camino Real specific plan area. About 17 are part of these commercial districts that we'll cover. And then about 4 are from apartment districts. So these cover about 60 of the 69 sites. And then there's a few other sites that are within different zoning districts that we're not going to cover. So the biggest change is going to happen in the El Camino Real downtown specific plan. So the El Camino Real downtown, sorry, this is our zoning map, and I've circled here where it says SPECRD, which stands for specific plan, El Camino Real downtown. And looking at our zoning map, it's this light blue that runs along El Camino Real in downtown. So the El Camino Real downtown specific plan, also called the specific plan or the downtown specific plan or the ECR DSP, you might hear being referred to with lots of different terms. It came out of a visioning process from 2007 and 2008. It was developed between 2009 and 2012, and it was adopted in 2012. So it's a little over 10 years old. It also had a cap of residential units in the downtown area of 680, and that's something that's going to be removed in this process. Here's another picture of it, kind of showing that within the downtown specific plan, there are actually 10 sub-districts, meaning that there's different treatments happening in different parts of the El Camino and downtown corridor, and that each of these kind of areas have different characteristics. This is a chart showing the 10 zoning districts of the downtown specific plan and what the different zoning development standards are, specifically the land use, the floor area ratio, the density per acre, and the heights. And we're going to show a couple examples here. It also shows, by the way, both what's called base, which means that a developer can just come in and develop at the base level, which is permitted. Or if they want to give additional public benefit, they can get extra development standards and extra development intensity. So I've zoomed in here to show 3 different of the 10 zoning districts in the downtown specific plan, showing that there's differences between the type of land use. So some are showing more mixed use, more retail, some more emphasis on residential, the different levels of intensity and dwelling units per acre. So you can see in the El Camino Real Southeast section of the downtown specific plan, it was allowing much more units per acre than, for example, the downtown adjacent, different heights allowed, and the facade. We're going to go over this a little more detail. So here's the first example that we just looked at, which was the El Camino Real Southeast. And I'm showing you what it was because I want you to understand that so you can see where we're going. So this is talking about the area, which is where the new Stanford Middle Plaza is. It's also where Big Five is, and it's for mixed use residential. This is the same zoning standards that we saw before, so allowing kind of some of the higher heights in the original downtown specific plan, up to 5 units of residential, or up to 5 stories of residential, up to 4 stories of office. So this was one of the more intense areas of the downtown specific plan originally. Next is the Station Area West, SAW. And this area is where there's like Mountain Mike's and Sultana. This is kind of between where Cafe Baroni is and the downtown area, right on El Camino Real. This area was anticipating residential heights up to 4 stories and office heights up to 3 stories, kind of as a way to transition from the train station, the slightly more intense areas, to the downtown area. And finally, I'm showing you the downtown adjacent area, which is the areas along the further from downtown side of Menlo Avenue and further from downtown side of Oak Grove, and then some of the University Avenue. And these, again, kind of transition more to some more residential areas. And so these were showing kind of heights of residential of about 3 stories and office of about 2 stories. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what was anticipated in the downtown specific plan. So we need to what's called upzone, or allow for more density and intensity in that area. And one of the first things we must do is increase the base zoning to at least 30 units an acre. And you might remember that from the at least the downtown adjacent zoning, the density allowed was actually less than 30 units an acre. So this is an example of why we need to do what's called upzoning. One of the things is, so the floor that we were required to do for the housing element and for state requirements is 30 units an acre, but there's some reasons why, and you'll see in a few moments, why the staff recommendations are to actually exceed this 30 units an acre, even for market rate buildings, because we already know that we can exceed that using those supersizing tools for 100% affordable. So we know that, as I mentioned at the very beginning, that to get our affordable housing units, we're probably going to need a combination of 100% affordable and inclusionary projects. We also have something called a mid-cycle review of our housing element. And if our zoning isn't strong enough and yielding what we expected, we're going to have to rezone, and we might find ourselves out of compliance and lose potentially local control. We've also heard a lot of feedback from affordable housing developers stating that more density is needed, and that a common building type is known as a 5/1, which means that there's a concrete podium and 5 stories of wood frame construction. So we are looking to, or staff is recommending, to keeping this in mind as we look at what density levels can produce these types of construction. Another factor is to affirmatively further fair housing, which means that what we allow over in the Bayfront and in District 1 to be considered in districts 2 through 5, so that we have an equitable city distribution of housing and affordable housing. And finally, one of the pieces of feedback I constantly hear from residents is to revitalize our downtown. And by allowing more density, we'll have potentially more people, more buildings turnover, to get more restaurants and retail on the first floor and things like that. So we're going to look at some of the staff recommendations now. So this is from the staff report for this zoning. And as you can see, this is why I put together this video. This is attachment B. It's incredibly detailed and wonky, and I'm going to try to walk you through some of the key points here. Okay, so basically, this chart is showing 8 of the 10 zoning districts are being recommended to be upzoned. Remember, I said there were 10 districts in the downtown specific plan. The staff originally is recommending upzoning 8 of those districts. The 2 that they're not originally recommending to upzone are the El Camino Real Southeast, which is where that Middle Plaza Stanford development is, and El Camino Real Northeast R, which is where Springline is. So going back to our original downtown specific plan, that's what the arrows are pointing to. The base density allowed ranges from 18.5 units an acre to 50 units an acre. And remember, we are required to have at least 30 units an acre to be compliant with our housing element. And then the bonus level development that was allowed in the downtown specific plan, again in this gray column, ranged from 25 units an acre, which again is below the 30, up to 60. And we saw that 60 in one of the zoning districts that I showed you. So back almost a year ago in December 2022, staff brought forward in a study session kind of showing that minimum floor requirement for a lot of the zoning districts of 30 units an acre, and for bonus going up to potentially 50 to 40 to 50 to 80 units an acre for bonus. And this is where there was feedback given to staff, which I showed on a previous slide here about all the reasons why it's probably important to exceed kind of the floor of where we need to go. And with that feedback, staff has now come back with something they're calling the base density increase option, which brings us base densities from 40 to 60 an acre and bonus densities from 50 to 100 units an acre. And this is regardless of whether it's market rate or affordable. And remember, if it's affordable, it can actually get even higher. This is what is being recommended by both the Planning Commission and staff at this time. We're going to be discussing that at Tuesday night's City Council meeting. So one more thing I want to point out is that you can see that the areas that are being recommended to have the highest density are the downtown, the station area east, which is where kind of Cafe Baroni is, and the station area west, which I went through kind of where Mountain Mike's and Sultana is. So for each of these 8 zoning districts that are having these different densities shown, there's more development standards, which that giant chart was trying to show. And if you look just at downtown, this is showing the different, all of those different development standards for that one downtown sub-district. So this was the original downtown specific plan, base density of 25 units an acre. This was the December, kind of turned up to meet the minimum requirements or slightly exceeding that minimum requirement. And then this is the current density that's being recommended because of all the rationale slide that I showed you earlier. This slide actually doesn't have the base density, the bonus density shown, but there are associated bonus densities that are on that major spreadsheet from attachment B if you want to look at it. I want to point out a couple things about floor area ratio. So the floor area ratio is actually being recommended for commercial to stay exactly as it was before. And what we're doing is we're increasing the residential. So we're trying to make it more attractive for developers to do residential in addition and over beyond commercial. There's also something being added called a step-up floor area ratio, where if a developer offers certain things that the city is looking for, namely for sale units and some larger units for family, the developer can get some additional development intensity. And then I also want to point out here, as I said before, the differences in height and facade height. So that's that street feel feels lower than the total height feel. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get confused when looking at all these development standards to think like, what does this feel like to me? How do I have a sense of what these buildings could actually feel like? And I think a lot about height. So what I've done, and this I actually have not had a chance to verify with staff, so take this with a little bit of caution, but I went through a lot of the detail through footnotes available in attachment B and through the original downtown specific plan that had information about various heights. And I went through and I created these columns. So the first column is the maximum heights allowable in the original downtown specific plan. So the original downtown specific plan contemplated heights of 3 stories to 5 stories. And the parentheses is showing for bonus, so if they give additional public benefit. The December, kind of meeting that floor, the proposed heights were more along 4 stories, maybe 5 stories, 6 with bonus. So that's kind of how the dial is being turned up in the downtown specific plan area. The latest iteration, again, that the Planning Commission and staff is recommending, goes all the way up to 5 stories and 7 with bonus for those most intense areas, and about 4 stories in most of the other areas. So just to give you a sense, we're looking at downtown transforming into some taller heights. Now, as I reminded you earlier, there are those supersizing things for 100% affordable, because up until now, we haven't really been talking only about 100% affordable. We've been talking about all of the zoning in the downtown specific plan area. Specifically, the third tool, the State Assembly Bill 1763, which is within 1/2 mile of transit, that actually covers the entire downtown specific plan area. And for the downtown, that means that if it's an 100% affordable project, it could have an unlimited amount of dwelling units per acre. Now, it still has to abide by different development standards, but it could be even higher than what we were looking at that chart. The height can actually increase only up to 3 stories or 33 feet. So that means that if we could be seeing much higher and taller buildings for 100% affordable. And that's part of the plan for the parking lots. That's a large part of our affordable housing strategy, that the city owns those public parking lots. So stay tuned on that. So if you were to just add 3 stories onto the height limits that I was calculating earlier, this final column is showing that. So we could see 7-story, 8 stories, even 10 stories potentially for 100% affordable housing in the downtown specific plan that are within 1/2 mile from transit. Now, going back to that 5/1, that type of construction that developers are tending to build now, sometimes it's 5/2. They build a two-story concrete podium. I don't know how likely it is that developers are interested in building these 8 and 10-story buildings. It sometimes requires a different construction method that can increase costs, which is why a lot of times you see that 5 to 7-story building, and then you don't see anything else until you get to more like a skyscraper. That's yet to be seen, but I just want to point that out to you. Okay, we're going to leave the downtown specific plan area, and we're going to look at commercial districts. So if we're going back to our zoning map, the pink areas and this one red area represent the districts that are zoned some of the commercial that we're looking at. So one of the first things we need to do with our commercial districts, for the commitments that we've already made in the housing element, is to allow these commercial districts to have residential. Currently, what this chart is showing, that most of these different zoning districts that have a commercial designation do not even allow any residential. So we first have to allow it, and we have to allow it at a minimum of 30 units an acre for all development. The second thing that staff is proposing, and this is a little outside the scope of the housing element, but just to simplify their work, there's so many zoning districts. Remember I said we had about 3 dozen. They're looking to consolidate some of the zoning districts. So they're taking 7 zoning districts and consolidating it into one called C2B, which actually already allows some residential. So that's another thing that's happening in the commercial district. So there's basically then 4 zoning districts that are being really impacted by this zoning change in commercial, that are now going to allow residential at different levels. So depending on which of the commercial zoning districts allows more or less commercial, and they're all going to allow this residential. I know one of the things that's been talked about both at City Council and the Planning Commission is for these commercial parcels. I think one of the concerns is that we could end up replacing, let's say, Willow Market, which is commercial, into 100% residential, and then we could lose some of these neighborhood serving retail spots, which we don't want to do. So that's going to be a discussion, I think, happening on Tuesday to make sure that we both get the housing that we need and we're committed to, and making sure our community has the different things that we need to have a thriving neighborhoods. So for commercial, again, these are the opportunity sites in the housing element. And of the 69 sites, when I counted up, please, if I'm off, please let me know. I think I counted 17 of these are those commercial districts, and those span those 4 different specific C zonings. They are located, so these are these 2 maps I'm about to show all the C commercial districts that are kind of getting this rezoning treatment. This is up at Sand Hill Road, and of all of these commercial ones, 4 of them are opportunity sites. This is the Safeway up in Sharon Heights. This is Middlefield and Willow, and 5 of these are opportunity sites. We're looking at, this is near Burgess Park. 4 of these where kind of the Stanford Blood Center is. These are opportunity sites, and these are kind of Willow Road on the downtown side of 101. There's about 3 of these that are opportunity sites. So the ones that are opportunity sites can utilize both of the 2 supersizing density bonuses that we've covered, both the city affordable housing overlay and the state density bonus. So the opportunity sites that are commercial in the housing element can get to 100 units an acre. The commercial sites that are not opportunity sites right now currently only apply, would only be applicable for the state density bonus law, but not the local affordable housing overlay. Okay, the 3rd zoning district that we're going to look at is R3, which is apartments. So those are represented by the orange, and I've circled the orange here on the legend, and this is again the zoning map. And in the housing element, we made a commitment to allow the R3, those orange zoning districts that are around downtown. So the light gray is representing the downtown specific plan and downtown area. This is El Camino. And the dark gray are showing the apartments, the R3s close to downtown. And we basically committed to allowing more density, 30 units an acre, on those apartment parcels near downtown. So those are going to have 30 units an acre. We've also lifted a requirement that those have a 10,000 square foot minimum. And remember, if those are within a half mile of transit, which I believe these actually are, they would apply to AB 1763, which means they could have even more density than they could have unlimited density per acre at those sites. Again, as long as they're staying within different development standards, including that height within the three extra stories. One of the comments at the Planning Commission was whether the rezoning of these R3s should apply only to the area around downtown, or should be citywide to kind of all of the orange that we see. And there's cases to be made on whether it's best to concentrate it near amenities and transit near downtown, or whether we want to have all areas within the city kind of carrying the housing burden for a more citywide approach. And that is a conversation that may come up on Tuesday night. I've covered those 3 zoning districts and all of our supersizing densities for 100% affordable. There are a few other zoning changes that I'm not going to cover in detail. Those include for sites that were in the cycle 5 housing element that have at least a 20% affordable. Those can have by right development, which means those don't need any discretionary review. There's also going to be conversations around parking minimums especially around the El Camino Real downtown specific plan. And actually for 100%, I believe there's some state laws around parking requirements near transit that those have been lifted, but also conversations about parking requirements at different sites and zoning districts. There's an overlay district that's being created to allow carve-out development for large sites, so that only an acre or 2 could be kind of used for a different use. And we're also, per state requirement, updating our zoning ordinance related to childcare to allow for large family childcares by right. So I know we've covered a lot. My final thoughts are there's a lot we're going to be talking about at the study session on August 22nd at 6 p.m. Some of the policy level considerations from my perspective are how are these proposed changes helping us meet the state requirements and the commitments that we've already made in the housing element, including what can be done in the time that we have, particularly before January 2024. How are these changes reflecting the 2 years of community and stakeholder input regarding the housing element, and where and how we're increasing density and intensity of development, especially for affordable housing? How this is distributing the housing, especially the affordable housing throughout the city. I just brought that up with the apartment districts, kind of where that housing and intensity goes, how the zoning achieves potentially other policy related goals like revitalizing downtown, and of course how all these impacts affect residents throughout the city. So wow, a lot going on. I encourage you to pay attention to the next steps. The study session will be held on August 22nd. If you missed that, or if you're watching this video after August 22nd, there will be, this will be coming back in late fall or early winter for the staff to present kind of how they've updated the zoning ordinance for the feedback that we're giving. And then again, we must adopt these zoning changes by January 31st, 2024. I do want to note that annually, throughout the housing element 8-year cycle, there's going to be progress reports on how the city is doing vis-a-vis our commitments to our regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA. And then mid-cycle in 2027, we're going to have a big review. And in the yellow here, I've basically written that that's a huge checkpoint for us. And if it turns out that we're not meeting the commitments and seeing the permitting that we basically are saying that we're going to see based on our opportunity sites and our rezoning, then we may have to revisit our rezoning and allow even more in order to retain our local control and remain compliant with the state. So lots of ways to engage. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this has been an over 2-year process, and all of the presentations, agendas, videos from past meetings are on the City of Menlo Park's Housing Element webpage at menlopark.gov/housing element. There was a Planning Commission meeting last week on August 14th that has its own staff report where a lot of the data is, and a video of that meeting, which might be helpful for you, which covers a lot of the information I did. I have put the link here. Like I said, the August 22nd study session is a real important one. I encourage you to participate, either send in comments, attend virtually, or attend in person. You can email the entire City Council at city.council@menlopark.gov. Please note that those emails are public. You can email me with your feedback, or if you have questions about where I got all this information, or if you found an error, you can email me at jwallison@menlopark.gov. You can also join my mailing list where I publish these videos, and my newsletter at jenwallison.com/newsletters. So I want to thank you for joining me for this long video. I hope you found it helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the neighborhood. Thanks so much.